Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cabinet decision-making meeting for traffic and transportation. For those people who've been here before, you will know that I am not Councillor Lynn Stagg. I am Councillor Susie Horton. I'm the Deputy Leader chairing this meeting in place of Councillor Stagg, who is a Cabinet Member for traffic and transportation, who is unable to be here today. So a little bit of housekeeping, safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts, and we will assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who did sign in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you, which you might like, but it would be nice for other people to have a little turn. Okay, so I'm going to go on to introductions now. So I will start here.
I am Councillor Scott Peter Harris. I'm the Conservative spokesperson for traffic and transportation. Thank you.
Alison Harper, Democratic Services.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney. I'm the Labour Group spokesperson on traffic and transportation.
We have Charles. Do you...
Charles Burns. I'm here as a deputation.
Welcome, Charles.
Tim Reynolds, Finance, Portsmouth City Council.
Felicity Tidbury, Assistant Director for Transport. Hayley Chivers, Transport Planning Manager.
Simon Bell, Principal Public Transport Officer.
James Sylvester, Interim Strategic Transport Lead.
Welcome, everyone. So I'll go straight to the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is apologies. So obviously we have apologies from Councillor Stagg, who has injured herself and so is finding it difficult to come out and about. If you're watching, Lynn, I hope I do all right. Any other apologies? No other apologies. So we'll go on to item 2, which is declarations of members' interests. No. Item 3, which was is to do with a forward plan emission notice around the Park and Ride contract extension. So there's a page on this here, and my understanding of this is that the notice did not go in within the above 28 days. It was at 21 days, and the error was around focusing on the amount that was being described in the report rather than the total amount which needed that forward emission. So that's been rectified, and my understanding is that that sometimes things go in as late as 5 days, and that this has now been rectified. So are there any comments about that? I think it's quite self-explanatory.
No, I mean, the process has been followed, so the Chair of Scrutiny Management Panel is happy, so if he's happy, I'm happy.
Thank you. That's good. Okay, so item 4 is Portsmouth Park and Ride contract extension, and I believe that Simon is going to present the report. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So if I go through first the recommendations of this report, the recommendations are that it agrees to extend the current supported Portsmouth Park and Ride contract up until the 26th of October 2024, with delegated authority to the Director of Regeneration in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation and Section 151 Officer to negotiate with the current bus contractor. Agrees to increase the current contract price to an amount identified through the Department for Transport instigated network review process to a maximum increase of £45,000 per annum. Approves the development and implementation by the Transport Service, supported by procurement and legal services, of the procurement strategy to re-tender the contract. The process will include a review of options for electrification or hydrogen operation of Park and Ride services, either at a point of contract award or over the term of the contract. This process will be informed by the projected impact of recent successful Portsmouth City Council funding applications, including South East Hampshire Rapid Transit and Portsmouth Bus Service Improvement Plan. Approves that the pre-procurement activities may commence, including a peer review with fellow councils and soft market testing with operators, and notes the waiver of approval will need to be sought from procurement and legal services with respect to the proposed extensions to the contract set out in accordance with the council's contract procedure rules. So, I mean, this report is just for the recommendation to actually extend the Park and Ride contract to October 2024 and to increase the value of the contract by up to £45,000 per year. And it allows the council to carry out the full procurement exercise within the time permitted. So the contract, for information, the Portsmouth Park and Ride Service started in 2014 and with some variations has continued through to the present time. And this is what the report is, just to extend the contract for a further 18 months.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions? Graham.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I just wanted to clarify the business about the legal position regarding the agreement. I mean, I'm assuming if I've read the quotes correctly, that the Transport Act is what covers this. And in 8.3 it says these agreements must not exceed 8 years, but we're going a way bit beyond that. Is this a situation where they mustn't exceed 8 years and therefore someone could challenge us, or are we actually in trouble for having not exceeded the 8 years anyway? Because I'm assuming that if somebody's interested in tendering, they may wish to challenge us for not having put it out. So what is the position regarding that? And I may have a supplementary depending on the answer I get.
I'll defer to somebody in the transport team to answer that.
We haven't been challenged so far in terms of because the contract started in 2014, so 8 years would take you to 2022. So we're apparently 1 year past that. We've discussed matters with the current contractor of the service, and Stagecoach do operate additional services for us on this service, and they've not expressed an issue with this at this stage. And I think it's because the position is that Park and Ride usage has been very low. We had a long period of non-operation, over a year, because of COVID and lockdown, and that's effectively meant that that's delayed the whole service. But we're not anticipating any legal challenge on that.
The other thing to say is we're now extending this for 20 months, and I'm just wondering why we didn't maybe think about this a bit earlier, because it was obviously going to be an issue with all the strategic things that have been mentioned, that whether you'd be able to do it within a year. So I don't know maybe why we didn't do that a bit earlier. The other question I have relates to the parking reserve. It says the deficit on the parking ride is subsidised from the parking reserve. Can I be told exactly how much the deficit is per year on subsidising the park and ride?
So I can answer this one. So for the current financial year. Oh, sorry. So for the current financial year, the deficit is around £400,000, and that covers all of the park and ride services for this year.
And has that been the case throughout the contract for the 8 years, well, more than 8 years, around about that figure?
No, so it has got. So over the course of the pandemic, it got worse. Prior to that, I'd have to come back to you with those numbers.
Thank you. Scott?
Do you have any more? Actually following on from those points, Graham, actually. So the Park and Ride, from what you just said, Tim, is being subsidised to the tune of £400,000 this year from the parking reserve. And obviously, through the pandemic, it was progressively worse. I think it'd be interesting to know what the subsidy has been since the length of the contract has been ongoing, so we have an idea of how much each year we're subsidising a park and ride. I think that's a sensible thing to look for. Is that something that you could bring back to myself and Graham?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it quite easy to do?
Well, certainly if I can go back over sort of the year pre-pandemic, over the pandemic, and at the moment. If going back for the whole contract might take a bit longer, but I can certainly give you an idea of pre-pandemic, over pandemic, and now.
It also would be helpful, while we're on the subject of the parking reserve, if we could have a breakdown of how much is in the parking reserve and what it's been spent on and what it's being allocated to. Because I know that so much is allocated to bus services, which is historical, but I think it would be a good idea for myself and especially Councillor Heaney as opposition members to know exactly where the parking reserve is being committed, especially considering we have an upcoming annual budget meeting, which I'm sure one of us or both of us might want to look at the parking reserve to use for certain schemes, which I'm sure would be mentioned. Also, I'd like to just mention on, I think it's the bit in the report, actually, Simon, 2 seconds, let me just find it on my screen. It mentions about to proceed with the contract at present could attract a premium due to the number of uncertainties in the market. I mean, obviously the bus service operator grant, they currently financially it favours a diesel operation. Would diesel be cheaper than electric at the moment in terms of the current climate with the cost of electric buses?
The cost of purchasing electric buses is substantially more. It's over double. I mean, the market is evolving in terms of alternative fuels other than diesels. And if you go up to Guildford, you'll see that the Park and Ride in diesel in Guildford operates with electric buses. But they are a lot more expensive to purchase, but their running cost is a lot less because obviously you haven't got the fuel cost.
That's a really interesting point. And obviously the shelf life for an electric bus is probably shorter than it would be for a diesel bus, because I think the battery life would be I think they'd probably only give you a warranty for about 10 years, whereas obviously a diesel vehicle can go on longer and longer because it can be repaired.
I think that's reasonable to say that. I mean, the battery does need to be replaced. I mean, the battery won't. It's viewed that the life of a double-decker bus or a single-decker bus is most probably 16 years. They're written off. The assets are written off over a period of that length, most probably by bus operators. And so, yes, you would be in a position that you wouldn't get to 16 years without having to replace the battery. And so that is a substantial amount of money that would need. But then again, you've got then a duration of period of operation with virtually limited fuel costs.
Yeah, it's a bit of a quandary, isn't it? Because quite often they say with the price of batteries compared to the price of actual buses, you know, it'd be cheaper to actually just buy a new bus. I mean, this is the same with electric vehicles, and the batteries aren't what I call environmentally friendly either, because they get chucked onto a scrap heap. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But I mean, other than that, I don't really have any more questions on it. But I know we're trying to be really green, and that's great. But actually, the batteries themselves, when they finish, are they that green? I think it's a question worth asking.
Good question. Don't know the answer, Scott, I'm afraid. Graham, can you undo your thing? Thank you. Okay, so that's good questions, and thank you for those responses. And thank you also, Simon, for reading out the recommendations, which everyone will be pleased to know that I'm not going to repeat. So I'm going to assume that that those have been taken on board, and I'm happy to approve those. Okay, so item 5, which is the Transport the South East Strategic Investment Plan. And so I think I'm going over to James now to present.
Thank you, Councillor. The recommendations are twofold. Firstly, it's recommended that the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation notes the inclusion of the Eastern Road active travel schemes within the SIP as outlined in section 4 of the report. And secondly, it's recommended the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation approves the final draft of the SIP for the South East. If we can just quickly explain those two items there. Firstly, the inclusion of the active travel schemes, or active Eastern Road active travel schemes. That's what the City Council requested in the consultation that took place in the summer. And secondly, with regard to the approval of the final draft of the SIP, effectively, most of the report, sections 3 and 5 of this report outline the main consultation responses. There's actually, if anyone wants the full consultation response, it comes to over 50 pages, but we've alluded to the main consultation document in the report. And we would like to approve the SIP because of the numerous benefits that it will bring in the long term to Portsmouth. They're outlined in section 6 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that succinct summary. It was a good report and detailed. Any questions or comments from either Graham or Scott?
Just a brief one. I mean, I'm very pleased to see the inclusion of the Eastern Road schemes in there, because obviously that does impact on the cycle lane on that side, and I've heard the aspirations to try and improve that. I suppose the question I have is that it says here this is something that will be, central government will have due regard to the work undertaken in making decisions, and this is obviously a wish list in a sense, aspirational wish list. Have we got any idea when any of this will be considered? Is it like a sort of 5-year thing, or a 10-year thing, or a whatever year thing? And I'm just wondering, I'm assuming we're hoping government might stump up some money for some of these things, but that might be a bit of a challenge in current circumstances. And I wonder if, although we say there are no direct financial implications of approving the recommendations, that we might have to contribute to some of these things in the future. So there's about 3 questions there.
Did you get them all, James? When are the government going to cough up? Do we have to match fund it? And what was the third one? Will we have to? Can't remember what the third one was, but I remember those 2.
I think it was Graham was asking, do we have like a measurable target of when it's going to happen? Is it 5 years, 10 years?
Timeline.
Okay, with regard to the first one, unfortunately, Councillor, we don't have too many details as to when the government will fund these schemes. All we know is that they'll be submitted in March to the government, and then it's anyone's guess as to when the next budgetary cycle or whatever of government will be. Some of the schemes are national highway schemes and network rail schemes and those sort of things, so they're already in programmes. But a lot of the schemes are unfunded. Connected with that, and it also alludes to, I think, the second point that you're making, the officers at Transport for the South East are talking to all 16 local transport authorities to try and get some prioritisation, some sort of short, medium and long-term aspirations as to when these can be delivered. It's still anyone's guess, I'll be honest with you. I can't say to you that Eastern Road active travel bridges will be funded in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Do bear in mind that the document runs to 2050, so it's a very long-term strategy. It's going to constantly morph and evolve and change. So the strategy that exists now, I expect, will be quite different than the strategy that exists in even just 5 years' time. I hope that helps.
Any more comments?
No, I just have a small comment. It sounds like a very nice thing to do, but we don't. I mean, I think Graham's touched on it. We have no real measurable target at the moment, and that's the concern that we have. So it's obviously it's lovely, you know, and I think it's a great thing that we're trying to do. But I'd like to see a report brought back after those bids have been submitted to have some progress of where we are, because I think it gives us some clarity about where we're going, and especially for future administrations in the council, there's going to be some potential match funding if we have to. That's obviously going to set to our budget. So I think that's important because it has a real ability to be something quite good. But obviously, I think we need to obviously have a timeline and progress of how we're going down the line. And I think I'd be happy if that was brought back. But that's, I mean, is that something we can do?
Of course, I think regular updates would be beneficial. With regard to the point that both councils have alluded to, the fact that it's included in the SIP does not necessarily mean that the government will fund 100% of it. It will often require a local contribution or other sources of funding. But yes, we can certainly bring updates back as and when appropriate.
Thank you for that and those comments. I think obviously I'm not the cabinet member for TNT, but from the increased knowledge that I have, it is about constantly keeping these things live and looking for synergies with other pots and other streams and everything, so that we can take advantage when we do have those opportunities to bid, and we're ready to go with that. But yeah, thank you for that report and the recommendations, which I'm happy to approve. So, item 6. This is one where we have a deputation, but I understand in this meeting we normally give the report first, and then I'll go to the deputy. So, Simon, again, back to you. The concessionary fares scheme reimbursement to bus operator.
Thank you, Councillor. So this report is the annual report we bring to TNT each February concerning the reimbursement rate that we will be reimbursing bus companies out for travel by using the concessionary fare scheme. The recommendations are that it's recommended that the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation notes the contents of this report, approves that bus operator reimbursement rates reverts to actual journeys made using the concessionary fare pass from the 1st of April 2023, approves the unallocated concessionary fares budget be used to meet the cost of reinstating bus service withdrawals during 2023-24 in the first instance following DfT guidance, approves the revision to the older person's concessionary pass end time to 0200 hours from the current 2300 hours from the 1st of April 2023. Delegates authority to the Director of Regeneration in conjunction with the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation and the Section 151 officer to make changes to the operator reimbursement rate within the allocated budget where such changes are considered necessary, having regard for any amendments to central government guidance, notes the findings of the hospital appointment trial and extends the trial until the 31st of March 2024 in order to collect further data and report back to Traffic and Transportation Cabinet Member in February 2024. As I've said, this is an annual report that we bring forward concerning the reimbursement. Prior to the pandemic, reimbursement rates were set based on usage of travel, and operators were to be no better or no worse off. As a result of the effects of the pandemic on bus ridership and concessionary fare pass usage, guidance from the DfT over the previous 2 years had recommended that the authority reimburse at higher than usage figures. For the current financial year we're in now, we're reimbursing based on a tapered. So the usage is declining. We started at 90% at the start of the financial year. For the current month, the current 3-month period, for quarter 4, we are at 76% of the pre-COVID level, and that is. And we are proposing then that from April we would go to actual, which is most probably around that figure in reality. This report does that in terms of the hospital trial. This is hospital appointments, and we're proposing to extend that for a further year. It only started in November, December, so it's not been running very long, and it's so we can get a more accurate impact on the usage, the number of people that are making use of that, and it would then allow us to make the Cabinet Member to make a more informed decision in February next year.
Many thanks, Simon. Charles, do you want to do your deputation now?
Thanks, Councillor, for opportunity to make a deputation. And having spoken at a previous TNT about the possibility of allowing the older person's bus pass to be used beyond 2300 hours, then I'm delighted to see it in this report, and I urge you to accept that. It will make one ancient wife very happy who can go out dancing 8 nights a week after midnight. Regarding the .26 hospitals, yes, thank you for carrying out that experiment. And as spoken at the previous TNT, which I think must have been September, then as it's being extended for another year, can you please explore the possibility of it being extended to volunteer staff working at the 2 main hospitals? The reason being, it will probably not cost more, it would just transfer journey times. For example, today I had problems at St Mary's where I've reopened 2 refreshment counters with not getting them staffed until 10 o'clock because the people working today were coming by bus and starting after 9, and one of them needed 2 bus changes, and it takes 3/4 of an hour and therefore doesn't start till 10 if the buses were on time. Whereas there is a real possibility for League of Friends trade earlier in the day, and so if it were possible for volunteer staff working for NHS, and I know there could be calls for other people as well, but we do treat NHS as something special. And I purposely put on the stuff because I'm wearing my badge now, because we are checked out through the NHS, and therefore anyone having NHS ID is probably fairly genuine, and so not too much chance of fraudulent use. So if that can be explored for the coming year, that would be really useful, please.
Thank you, Charles. Are there any questions or comments? I'll start with Scott this time.
Thank you. It's on the report, just bear with me a second. It's looking at 2.3 of the report. So it approves the unallocated concessionary travel budget. I know you've just gone into that in quite a lot of depth to meet the cost for reinstating the bus service withdrawals during 23-24. Can you just go through what those potential withdrawals are? What services?
At the moment, we are aware of there is a paper coming to TNT on the 8th of March, but the services that at the moment bus operate first have indicated they will not be operating without additional council support. Services 13 and 14, service 18, and service 22, which is a council-supported service, where they've handed it back to the council. So that they are the current services, but obviously as the year goes on, there could be other changes to services depending on how ridership is, what government grants there may be, because there has been some direct government grants to bus operators. Bus recovery grants, the current one, which at the moment expires the end of March.
Okay. On those numbers you've just given for buses, I mean, that's great. I like the fact they're numbers. Could you actually outline what the routes go to and from? Because I'm under the impression, I think the 22 serves Cosham. I think the 13 and 14 would be a Baffins route. Which one's the 18? Can you just clarify that? I'm pretty sure that's the one that stops at Hilsey.
It is, you're correct, Councillor. So it goes from Upper Polesgrove through Cosham, Hilsey, through North End, goes down through Fratton to Southsea. And that's currently every 35 minutes, Monday to Friday, and every hour, Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, I can give you more details on the other routes if you wish.
Please do. We are being filmed.
Services
it's
13...
also to explain to anyone that's watching, because obviously
well,
they
indeed,
see
yes.
numbers of buses. I think it'd just be easier to explain what the routes are.
Indeed. Services 13 and 14 both start at the city centre. They operate out the city centre via Arundel Street, and then they operate as a loop either via Milton or via Baffins, and then come back in as the other service. So they go out, leave the city as a 13, they turn to a 14 around Portsmouth City College, and then come back in that way. And Service 22, which operates... as you said, around Cosham, it also goes to Farlington and Highbury. Relax.
22 is the one that they've had issues with, I think, this week, where I think they've cut the service early, from what a resident complained to me this morning. On that note, I think it's worth noting that the report says that will be funded, obviously, from the concessionary track. Will that be funded for the full year?
The DFT guidance is that the funding we have will be, so the proposal is that we will fund the service initially short term while we carry out a comprehensive tender of all the services, and then a further paper will be brought back in June to TNT in June with a recommendation in terms of which contracts and which services will be awarded going forward. But the aim is for that money is available for the whole year for any other services.
Okay, so basically it will save those services effectively for 4 months, and then it will be potentially on the chopping block again. That's what it sounds like.
I mean, the money there will be for the whole financial year. So the reality is that once the tenders are returned and it comes back to TNT in June, a decision will be made by the cabinet member as to which services, or if all services, will be supported. I mean, that decision's obviously not been made yet. We haven't got submitted the tenders, drawn up the timetable, sent them out, or they've come back yet.
As we spoke about the parking reserve earlier, I think it's worth noting, are those services supported by the parking reserve as well?
There is, so this year there is some funding. I think there's about £150,000 gone towards tender bus routes from the parking reserve.
So those bus routes are subsidised already as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're doing is we don't have enough subsidies, so we're using this money to subsidise that service. I think that's what we're trying to get to. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Can I just, services 13 and 14, we subsidise on Sundays and bank holidays, but monies to Saturdays, the council does not subsidise them. They operate currently commercially with government funding through BSOG, that's always been referred in terms of fuel duty rebate, but also the bus recovery grant. Service 22 is a council-supported service, which we currently support to the tune of about £42,000 a year, and that will, And then you've also got service in 18 and 19, which is a completely commercial service at the current time, but from the end of March it won't be.
That's really comprehensive. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. Any other questions, Chair?
That was very impressive, wasn't it? Do you have any questions or comments?
Just a couple, yes. We've got information from Stagecoach about the passenger data on older persons concession vehicles on 5.3. Do we have any information from the other operator?
We don't at the present time. We're still waiting for that data.
Right.
But first we'll provide that data. That's for the hospital. People attended hospital appointments before 9 o'clock, isn't it? I believe. That's the data you're referring to, Councillor.
Table 1 in 5.3 says Stagecoach South bus passenger data stages older persons concessionary fare pass usage.
Yes.
So that's the table. So that thing, not just the.
Sorry, you're right. That does. That illustrates, because we made a change to start from between 0 and 9. It used to be a start time as 9:30. We brought it forward to 9 earlier. We did do a previous decision-making meeting.
Just to say, when we do get the figures, so first, if we could have those, it'd be useful to have, and then I can add it to the report or background information. That's quite useful. I don't want to stray into the issue of the next report on the next agenda, because I did pick up the briefing one. I've not read it properly yet, but I was aware there. I mean, it seems perfectly reasonable. We're actually going back to funding the concession fares on the basis of number of trips made. And it seems to me that is reasonable, because we did it on a formula basis, I think, until recently, given our current situation. And I suppose the issue will arise as to whether the new bus improvement plan funding can in any way be used to help and support services in addition to what we do on concession. But I think that's probably for another another meeting. I don't think I have any other questions really. I think as I don't want to stray into the other item, which is on our next meeting in March, so I think I'll leave it until then.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, I just have a couple of questions I'd just like to ask. It's more so on the points that Charles raised about the hospital trips, which I think is a very good part of the report, and I think it's actually one of the better things we've been doing recently. I did request at the time, could we look to extend that to dentist appointments and GPs? And I think that would be something to be interesting to be looking at, because I know that people obviously need to get to dentist appointments early as well, and a lot of old people do book in, if they can get a dentist appointment, that is, if they're lucky. But I think it'd be something worth looking at. Is that something that we are exploring potentially?
That can be considered, but we have to consider at the moment, by having just hospital appointments, people have a letter or proof that we need to ensure the driver can see that the proof, and so the proof different. If you've got lots of different dentists, lots of different GPs, the proof that they've got an appointment, because it's a far wider number of places, will be more difficult. We just need to make sure, because we're reimbursing concessionary fares based on actual travel now. So if that increases, that will cost the council more in terms of the number of journeys made.
Yeah, I know. I think it's just we don't want to exclude anyone, and I think that's the biggest issue about the exclusion of certain people. I mean, especially with dental appointments, I do feel quite strongly about that. Obviously, I think if they were an NHS dentist, they would have a letter, but obviously they're in a private practice, they wouldn't. So it's a hard one to differentiate from, and I'd rather you made that decision than me. So I'll put it on your head rather than mine.
Thank you, and I take on board that point as well. And I think Charles, in his actual deputation, did talk about where do you have a cut-off point, and I think there needs to be some research into the viability of the service versus, as you quite rightly say, trying to do everything that we can to support people. But I'm sure that the message has landed very well, and we can take that away, and I'm sure that Lynn will pick that up. And I am pleased that that Charles is pleased that all these older people's late night social lives will be enriched by a 2 a.m. cut-off. So thank you for those comments, and I think there's some homework to do on this about looking at, and it sounds like very sensible things to explore. So thank you for your questions, thank you for your comments, thank you for being kind to me, and I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you all.